Welcome to another episode of the Compass Podcast, where we're finding spirituality in the everyday. We're jumping a few years back on this episode of Compass. Schedules are hard to coordinate during the summer months, and that makes it tough to get new material to you from time to time. But it also presents an opportunity to dig through the vault of the Compass Podcast and shine some new light on an early episode that still brings some inspiration and clarity to our present day. My name is Ryan Dunn. Pierce Drake was with me on this episode from the past, and together Pierce and I talked with Reverend Ryan Canaday, and this was back in 2018. Reverend Canaday shared with us his story of recovery and alcoholism and finding deep connection with a higher power. And then this connection led Ryan to explore the power of support groups and specifically the role of spirituality in recovery. All this ultimately led to Ryan founding a church based on recovery. Well, we're 5 years on from this initial conversation, and the church, called Free Spiritual Community, is still changing lives. They've grown from meeting in the Cannaday's backyard to moving into their own spaces. And this story of this community and Ryan's ongoing story behind it are still hopeful and inspiring and totally relevant for today. So let's re-listen or listen for the first time to Reverend Ryan Canaday on the Compass Podcast. Pierce and I today are joined by Reverend Ryan Canaday, who's out in Colorado, braving the weather out there. Ryan, besides the weather and it being like in the single digits, how are you?
We're doing great out here, and thanks for having me as a guest on this podcast. I'm excited to be here.
You bet. We brought you in because I believe that your story really connects with a lot of people who are especially feeling like they're in a bit of a hole, like they don't have a caring community around them. And so I was hoping through our conversation today, Ryan, we could really kind of unpack some of your personal history and the life that you're living into now. So to blast us back to the past, Ryan, what were you like in high school? Who did you hang out with?
In high school, that's actually it's a big part of my story. I was considered the good kid in high school. I was active in youth group. I was active at a church. I was considered the good kid, hung out with the good crowd, and it was my brother, who was 3 years older. He was considered, he was the one into drugs and alcohol and addiction and in and out of the county jail. And for us, for our family, it was like, man, he's the one bringing shame into the family, and if he could just get his act together, then we'd be so much better. And so I was the good kid, and I was compared to my brother, who was the one getting into trouble quite often.
In that, Ryan, was that like is that a church environment? Like, did you grow up in church? Was that part of the story?
Yeah, I grew up in mid-Missouri. Grew up in the evangelical culture, so just different non-denominational churches.
Yeah.
And I was very active in the church setting in mid-Missouri as a teenager. Mm-hmm. When at 17 years old, I decided, youth group had such a profound impact in my life because it was a place where I was accepted. It was a place where I felt a sense of belonging. We moved to a new town when I was in the 8th grade. We moved from the St. Louis area into a small town, mid-Missouri, and I didn't fit in. It took me a long time to find a footing there. And so youth group became a place where I found a sense of belonging and welcoming. And so when I was 17 years old, I wanted to do that for other people. I thought, man, this is what the church can be about. I want to help others do this. So I decided to go to a small Bible school and study to be a pastor, and then history really started there.
Yeah. Well, what was culture like at the small Bible school?
Man, I was constantly not fitting in there. Yeah. I tend to have a bit of that, probably like many of your listeners, a bit of that rebel side in you that just wants to go against the flow. So I was asking too many questions. I had too many concerns, too many doubts. And actually it was, I was only there for a semester and a couple of weeks. And it was my first semester there. My mom called me on a Saturday morning. It was February 17th. Actually, yesterday marks 18 years. Wow. Yesterday being February 17th for us now. She called me on that Saturday morning and she said, Ryan, you need to come home. Your brother Brandon was just killed in a car accident. And so it completely turned my life upside down, made me question God. I actually hated this God. I hated God. I was angry at God. I felt so deeply betrayed by a God that I'd put my trust in. And in high school, man, I got up every morning with my mom and we would pray for my brother. And we were so certain that God was going to redeem him and bring goodness. And he did. He got clean and sober for a couple of years. And then he relapsed. And in that relapse, he got behind the wheel of a car and died on that night.
So you talk about now you're a pastor. Yeah, you've started this new incredible recovery service at your church. And tell us how that kind of started, how this all played into it.
Yeah, so it was 6 years ago. 6 years ago last month, I woke up and I was filled with shame and guilt and regret, and I was completely and utterly defeated. My wife, Tammy, came down the stairs, and I was passed out on the couch, drunk, and passed out like I had on so many other nights before. And on this morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, she was holding the empty liquor bottle that I thought I had hidden well enough. She had tears coming down her face, and she said, "What are we going to do?" For me, it was this really powerful and poignant moment in my life because it was like for the first time I could see I was actually hurting the people that I loved most. It was powerful because on that day, God gave me a gift of desperation. I was just so desperate. And it was a painful moment because I couldn't stop drinking. Yeah. And I wanted to stop drinking. I couldn't stop. And I tried so many times. I would try to just say, well, I won't drink on the weekends. And as a pastor, not to drink on a Saturday night, that's usually a good idea if you got to preach on Sunday morning. So I won't drink on the weekends, or I'll give up hard liquor and I'll just drink beer or wine. And that would last for a couple weeks. And I'd be right back to where I started. And, relationships in my life were broken. The Christmas before I got sober. So I got sober January 7th. That was when Tammy came down the stairs. January 7th, 2013. And that Christmas before, so just a few days before, we were at my sister's house. And I had been drinking like I would, and proceeded to get drunk like I did. And things went south like they so often would. And my sister, as we were leaving, she said, "Hey, listen, I don't want you to come around anymore."
Wow.
And I thought, seriously? Do you know who I am? And she says, yeah, I don't want my kids to be around this anymore. And in my mind, I couldn't see it, guys. I was so blind to it because, this addiction, the root of my problem is self-centeredness and ego and fear. And I couldn't see it. And I was thinking to myself, do you know who I am? I mean, just 2 days ago, I was preaching in front of 3,000 people for 5 worship services on Christmas Eve. And do you know who I am? And it was like, yeah, I don't want you around anymore. And the bottom line is I didn't like myself. I didn't know how to navigate in the world. I experienced pain and disappointment of my parents' divorce when I was 5 years old, and it was a really ugly divorce for many years. And with my brother's death, it just put me in that state of disappointment and deep disappointment with God. And these wounds, they left me feeling empty. And I am convinced we will all do something with that emptiness. And for me, what worked was I could pour some liquid down my throat, and all of a sudden I could just numb out, and I could numb out to the feelings and the pain, and I liked the feeling of not feeling.
So you said 18 years ago, I think you said this, 18 years ago, your brother passed away.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. And that's when you began to question God, get mad at God, etc. Then now we're talking 6 years ago. You're struggling with alcohol, but for what it sounds like you were pastoring at the same time.
Yeah.
So what kind of went from I'm mad at God in my early freshman year in college to becoming a pastor?
Yeah. Well, I still had those categories of holding on to God, but not knowing how to do it. So on the outside, I would have told you God is good and God had a plan for this and this was God's will. And on the inside, I was bitter and angry and disappointed and all the feelings I described. But I'm also convinced God never lets go.
Yeah.
God was still there. And in fact, it's brokenness and in that despair is where I experience God. And so I don't think it's a one-time thing. I so often wish when I talk to people, man, I wish my story was, I got into booze and I became an addict and then I got into ministry. But the truth is, in seminary taught me how to really crank up my drinking. I mean, and I found my ego told me I can be drunk and still do well in seminary. And so that's what I did.
Was that like the pressure of it that just kind of amped up that drinking?
Maybe, but I liked the feeling of being I liked the feeling of not feeling. Yeah. And I had pain in my life that I didn't deal with, and I liked the feeling of not feeling. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I'm still that call into ministry is something I think I experience still. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing, That's right. And it had to, for me, I had to experience those moments where I was crushed, where I was defeated, where I came to the end of my own sources. So, on that morning when Tammy said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Man, I know exactly what I'm going to do." And I went and called our counselor. We had a marriage counselor that we had done some work with. And I said, I'll call Sue. And I called Sue and I tried to set up an appointment with her. And I said, "Sue, I need to meet with you. I think I have a problem with drinking. I can't stop drinking." And she says, "Ryan, I would love to meet with you, but first you need to be involved in some sort of support group." And I was so angry, right? And I said, "A support group, like what?" And she said, "Well, have you ever heard of Alcoholics Anonymous?" And I got so mad, I hung up the phone and I went down to Tammy and I said, "Sue won't even see me. That's how bad this is." And she said, "Well, what'd she say?" And I said, "She won't see me until I go see it, until I get involved in a support group." And she said, "Seriously?" And I said, "Yeah, seriously." She said, "Ryan, I'm going to call her." And she said, "What'd she really say?" And I said, "She won't see me until I get involved in a support group." So she said, "Well, you're going to go, aren't you?" And so that started my journey in working a 12-step program and dealing with the dark parts of my story. And this miracle happened somewhere along the way that God completely removed the obsession of the drink. And for me, that was a miracle because I thought it could never happen. And I started making amends with people that I had hurt, that my actions hurt. And I started reaching out to others to help them in their journey. And now this incredible thing happened where I get to live a life where I'm free and I'm spiritually connected. And it's all because I encountered a God who did for me what I could not do for myself. And I still encounter that God on a daily basis. And I don't have to run from fear. I don't have to run from relationships. And my kids don't have to see Pops passed out on a couch. And, when Tammy goes into labor any moment now, I get to drive her to the hospital. She doesn't have to worry about if I'm going to be sober enough. And all that's ministry for me, right? So when we started this new thing that we call free, that my story is so much a part of that. Yeah. So it was just this year, I woke up, it was right, we were going to bed, it was April 3rd, my birthday. And before I went to sleep, I just said to Tammy, I said, we're not getting any older, or we're not getting any younger, we're not getting old, but we're not getting any younger. What would it be like to start a place for addicts and for people who love addicts and just for all sorts of people who are looking for a different kind of church experience where we can talk about these issues, where we get it wrong, where we fail, and where God meets us, and where we encounter that God who does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. What would it be like to start that place? And I wish I could tell you all it was a profound conversation. It really wasn't. We went right to bed after that. But it stayed on my heart. And the very next day, I reached out to the bishop on Facebook. And I just said, "Hey, Bishop Karen, is anything bubbling up in the conference about issues of addiction and recovery?" And I said, "I would love to get 30 minutes of your time," thinking that would be sometime in the next several months. Right. And she said, she wrote back within 5 minutes, and she said, "Oh my goodness, could we meet tomorrow?"
Wow.
And so, it was like one of those moments, like, oh my goodness, I don't have a vision for this. I just have things. I had notes, and I show up.
Do you have your ministry plan together? Yes. How many lives are going to be impacted?
But it was incredible because she said, "Do it." And I was like, "Well, do what?" And she said, "Just do the thing that's on your heart." And so Ryan, you know some of this story. We just started meeting in our backyard. We put a leadership team together in the first couple weeks, and we just started meeting in our backyard. And we opened it up for a place where what we can break the silence of addiction. Because see, we live in a suburb, South Denver, and the problem is we don't ever have to connect. We can cover up the sickness with power and privilege and money, and I can push a button in my car to open my garage, and then before I ever get out of my car, I can push that button and close the garage, and I never have to connect with anyone. But we know the problem of addiction. I don't know if y'all have been following the news, but man, Colorado's in all sorts of trouble.
Yeah.
And in the suburbs, we just have this like suburban sickness that we can cover up and wear a mask. And so at Free, we want to break the silence of addiction and create space for healing and recovery and spiritual connection. So that's how we started. Just right in our backyard, got people in the backyard, and thank God it never, in the 8 weeks we did it for the summer, last summer, it never rained. It could be windy, and right when we would start, the wind would calm. It was like, oh my goodness, God is in this thing.
Wow.
But it was pretty cool.
What does your community time look like at Free? Is it somewhat reminiscent of like an AA meeting where people are kind of sharing their stories with each other? Or what kind of structure do you have in your, it feels funny to say, like, what kind of structure do you have in your, quote, free time? But in your time in meeting in Free community.
I love that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In fact, we get that question a lot. So we do have our own space now. We actually moved into some space. It was this beautiful gift that was given to us. And so, we meet on Saturday nights at 7:00. And we start with, what I tell people is it's going to have a mix of church and a mix of a 12-step meeting.
Okay.
But the beauty is it's not going to be all alcoholics or all drug addicts. It's going to be people who are new in recovery and people who aren't sober. So at our, if you want to call it a church or spiritual community is what we call it, you're going to see people maybe a little boozed up. You're going to see people nodding off. We have a huge heroin epidemic here. You're going to see people nodding off. You're going to see people outside smoking. And, if you're bothered by that, this isn't the place for you. But when I look out at that, I see the kingdom of God and a place where people can come. We have people all the time say, man, I feel welcome here. And I've never done the church thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a group of just Jesus followers. We're getting all sorts of spiritual but not religious people looking for a spiritual journey. But we usually start with some songs. Right now we're rocking some YouTube, some live music, and we have everything from Eminem to Macklemore to Hillsong and worship music, and it's kind of whatever song we think speaks to that week. We'll play some music. I always give, in the church world, we call them sermons, but I wouldn't typically call them a sermon in that community. It's a short, usually 10 to 15-minute reflection. I always reflect on the scriptures. We intentionally pick scriptures that are give us the God of grace and love and freedom. And we call it free because all the things in life that set us free, things like grace and love and compassion and forgiveness, these are the things that are so freely given by God. And for our community at Free, they need to hear that. I need to hear that. That's a message that never gets old, and it's one that's hard to believe because we've told ourselves for so long that these things, we have to earn it. There's something we have to do to get it. And the message we hear in the scriptures and from Jesus is no. It's all given freely. It's already been given to you. You don't have to do anything to earn it. So I reflect on the scriptures, and we always have a storyteller. We have someone each week share their story around addiction and recovery. We always do celebrations because our community, we have so much pain and loss and heartache. We think it's important to not ignore those things, but we do start with celebrations. So sobriety anniversaries, babies being born, new jobs, transitions, and there's these beautiful celebrations that happen each week. We always pray together. We throw it out to the community to ask questions, to give their input, to give suggestions, and we have the most real and honest discussions that I always crave to happen in a church, because I think church should be the place where we do that, where we can talk about God and our experience strength and hope with recovery.
Where do you guys meet right now?
So here's I'll keep the 2-minute backstory really
you're
short.
good.
But when we were meeting in our backyard, it started to grow. We started with just a few of us, and then it was 20, then it was 30, then 40, 50 people. So my neighbors were starting to say things. We were loud. It was crowded. There was no parking, and it was happening every Saturday night for 6 weeks, right? So
Pastor
we started
throws
looking
the
for
sickest parties. Like, they're always keeping us up to.
Amazing Grace on the bagpipes, man. It was awesome.
Oh, the bagpipe. That's something right there.
That's beautiful. So we started looking at that right down the street. There was this grease monkey. It was, I think it was like 2,000 square feet, and it was just concrete floor, double bay garage. And I just thought that was like the bread and butter, and that's what I wanted. It was so organic and unchurchy. I just thought this would be perfect. We looked at it for 2 months. We were in discussions. When we went to sign the lease, the guy said, "Sorry, someone else beat you to it." The irony is it's still sitting empty. So we threw out a video on social that night, my wife and I, and we said how bummed out we are, and something's going to come along. We'll just be patient. That very evening, someone called us and said, "Hey, I didn't know you were looking for a spot. I have a space. Come check it out." And we went, but went on the drive over there. I was like, man, nothing's ever going to be as good as the Grease Monkey. That was it, man. And we walk into the space. It is totally finished, like total brand new paint, almost double the space.
Wow.
And we got it for the landlord was digging our vision, what we were doing in the community. So we got a super, super great deal on it. Way better than the Grease Monkey, which was smaller, wouldn't work for what we're doing actually. So it was this gift that was given to us, but it's storefront. In fact, I think it was a former Avita salon. It was some sort of salon. So it's all lit up. It's a beautiful place. It's 3,000 square feet. It works great for what we're doing, and we'll probably outgrow it at some point. But right now, it works really well.
Our listeners are a wide spectrum of people checking out faith, checking out Jesus, dipping their toe in spirituality. And then we have people that are very deeply connected to church life. And so for the people that are connected to church or are attending a community of faith, and they see this as a need in their own community, but they're in a context where that's really not happening well. What are some ways that you could lead them to begin having a conversation with the leadership, maybe their own leadership, maybe their pastors listening, go, man, I really resonate with this, to start something like this?
One of the reasons we started this was over the last 12 months, I've done 6 funerals of people who've died of addiction right in our own community. So right connected to my own church community, all under the age of 40.
Wow.
And so I just started seeing this need, and then people would come to these funerals, these friends of friends, and they wouldn't even know how to walk into a church and walk into a sanctuary. And it wasn't because they were trying to be disrespectful. It was just they thought they wouldn't be welcomed because they smelled like smoke. They may not have dressed the part, whatever the reason is. And so it was a need we started seeing. And the disease of addiction now affects more Americans than cancer, heart disease, diabetes. In Colorado, our drug overdoses are up in every single county, way above the national average. Opioids will kill 52,000 Americans this year and up to 500,000 in the next decade. So when we're seeing the statistics in Colorado, it's like these are the needs right in our community. So I think pastors and church leaders, we need to get honest and say, where are people dying? Where is there suffering? And maybe it's not addiction, though I'm certain there is addiction in your community, wherever you live. But where are the needs? And then how can we go meet those needs? And not try to make it just start a new church all the time, but start new communities where people who aren't going to feel welcome in a church might feel welcome coming and hearing about the good news of God's love for people. I mean, that's a message that never gets old. And no one has, most people I encounter don't balk at that message, right? That's a message they dig. And so we got to figure out how to create spaces and places where that message can be heard and lived into.
So Ryan, you started with this name of free as a representation of God's love and that it comes freely to us. When did that message come to you? Like, I'm sure that as you were confronted by your wife and starting your own recovery road, that you were dealing with all kinds of shame and guilt. When did this message become real to you? How did it become real to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up in a tradition that said you need to have a date and time of knowing your salvation. And so, for so long I could say, well, it was when I was 4 years old. I walked up the aisle in church and I tugged on the preacher's coat and I told him I wanted to be saved because he just preached a message about hell and it literally scared the hell out of me. So I want to be saved now. And what I've learned in recovery, so I'm talking in the last 6 years, is I've had to give up on all that. I've had to give up on this date and time and specifics because it's simply not the way God has revealed God's self in my life. It has been, it's been like this. There's moments where I wake up and think, oh my goodness, my life is so different and people are noticing it and I get to live this life now. I actually get to spend time with my kids and man, that's a moment of grace. Like I said earlier, I get to drive my wife to the hospital.
Yeah.
That's a small thing, but in my life, that's a huge thing because her greatest fear when she was pregnant with our second daughter, Shiloh, was that Ryan would be too drunk to get me to the hospital if I go into labor and we're going to have to call a friend and drunk Ryan's going to be in the back seat. Thanks be to God, I got sober when she was 9 months pregnant with Shiloh. But, she doesn't have that fear today. That's a moment of grace. That's a moment of life is different. I don't have to control everything, man. I used to just be this control freak. And if you didn't see God my way, well, I'd get after you. And if you didn't see life my way, I would just pound you into the ground to where you'd get tired of talking to me. And then I would think I was right because my ego told me I needed to be right. That's not the way life is anymore. I can't tell you exactly when it changed. All I know is over time when I started working the 12 steps and looking into my story and getting honest with myself, with others and with God, my life started to change and I started moving towards gratitude rather than anger. I could see God rather than hate God. I could see grace and forgiveness, and it wasn't all built around Ryan's shame. And so God was pulling me up from all that shame and guilt and regret and saying, dude, you got a new life. It's right here. The life I have created for you to live is right in front of you, and you get to actually live it. And to me, man, that is a gift that never ever gets old, and I hope it stays that way. I hope it's a gift that never gets old to me.
How has your family embrace this ministry as a whole, seeing church in this way versus a lot of us that grew up in that church that you described where you hide everything. Your kids are growing up in this atmosphere where grace abounds and the beauty of that.
Yeah, that's a great question because we do this together as a family. So my kids have been, especially my oldest daughter who's 8, she's just grown up around recovery and talk about addiction and recovery. In fact, just last night we were watching, she and I were watching Karate Kid. And you might remember the scene, Mr. Miyagi gets drunk and he's drinking, I don't know what it is, some sort of hard liquor. And she says, Poppy, is that what you were like when you were drunk? And I was like, yeah, baby, it was maybe even a little worse than that. And so she's just so used to, they're used to, we don't do a lot of secrets in our family. They know Pops is a recovering alcoholic. And from what they know, they're grateful Pops is sober. And Tammy, I could not do this thing without Tammy. We do this together. So all our flyers, our business cards, we are in this thing together. Our website, it's Reverend Ryan and Tammy Cannaday, because she has just as big of a role as I have. It could not happen without her being my sidekick. She's actually a big part of our ministry is coffee, because if you know anything about rooms of recovery, coffee is just a huge deal.
Yeah.
So we are now we roast all our own coffee. We're partnered with a coffee farm in Honduras, and they're actually friends of ours. So we know how their employees are treated, and we know it's fair wages that they're getting paid. And so we get green beans from them, and we have other beans coming in too. But we do all our own roasting. We sell coffee. It's one of the ways we keep our ministry going is through coffee sales. And we always provide coffee on every Saturday night we gather. Coffee's plays a big role for us. But yeah, and Tammy does all our roasting, all our bean buying. She's the professional. She has 12 years experience in the corporate world with coffee, so it's right up her alley. And but I'm so grateful that as a family we do this together, and it's not just Ryan doing his own thing. The kids always come with us. It's become their space too, and I actually love that. I hope it's something we're passing down to show them that that a church, it should be the place where we wrestle with God. We admit when we screwed up. We admit that we don't have all the answers.
That's right.
And so you're hearing real talk every single week of people who are really screwed up and people who don't have their stuff together. And it's kind of the way we like it. We want to keep it that way.
Wow.
So you mentioned as part of your community gatherings that y'all sometimes drop like some Eminem. Is that a community thing? Is everybody there like in unison dropping down some lyrics? Or is it more of a contemplative activity?
No, that's a great question, because see, I'm the way I look at music is most people don't gather together and sing. Most people don't sing out loud. We sing in the shower and we sing in the car when we're driving and no one else is around. And when the car pulls up next to us, we kind of tone it down. Then when the light turns green, we'll start ramping it back up. Right. But I've always found it, and I'm a church guy, right? I'm a pastor. I've grown up in the church. I've always found it awkward to sing in a church. It's always felt a bit awkward to me. But I love music. I love lyrics move me to new dimensions, new levels. They bring out something in me. So no, we don't do a lot of singing together. We did over Christmas. We did some Christmas carols, but so it's more a time of reflection, time of contemplation. It's more we pick songs that have to do with our themes. I'm not saying I'd be opposed to ever having musicians and bands and that sort of thing, but it's just not where we are right now. And it seems to work. If we play Eminem, we're going to make sure it ties into the theme. And on YouTube, you can pick, because my boy Eminem, he does like to drop the F-bomb.
I've heard
and
that.
I realize we have some children in our community, my own children being some of them. And so you can now on YouTube, you can pick clean versions, and they're going to bleep out F-bombs. But also in our community, the truth is you're going to hear some F-bombs being dropped. And I don't try to micromanage people when they talk about God. So if that's part of their experience, that's kind of free game. And we try not to overly control that.
Well, you're kind of I get a vibe of being a little bit anti-establishment. I think some of that comes out in the way that that you ink up your body. You're a tattooed individual. Are the tattoos, are they like a reminiscent of a life before, or is it like an ongoing thing? What are you communicating in those tattoos?
Yeah, no, it's ongoing. I've been getting tattoos. I'm 36 years old. I've been getting tattoos since I think it was 3 days after my 18th birthday. I still love them. People told me early on, my mother being one of them, "Hi, Mom, I hope you're listening." She said, "Boy, you're going to regret that. That's on there forever. That's permanent." I don't have one tattoo that I regret. And by the way, she's got 2 tattoos now. Yes, Mom, I just outed you. My first tattoo was I have the Jesus fish on my back.
No.
Which is kind of like, oh, why'd I get that one? But also it's an ancient Christian symbol that is actually, it's a beautiful symbol. So even with that one, I don't regret it. I'm glad it's there. But yeah, all my tattoos tell a story. I have my love arm, my family tree, and then my other arm is my arm of struggle, and it's got great significance to me. And on my knuckles, on my love arm, I have tattooed love on my knuckles, and on my struggle arm, my knuckles say free, because I'm reminded I'm free, and my struggles, they are what allowed me to see that I was free. And so I don't regret the struggles. I don't close the door on my past. They have made me who I am today. They have showed me God in the most real ways. God has appeared to me in the most life-giving ways. So I don't regret it. It's my story, I
love it. So Ryan, you've got a story that not only personally connects with a lot of people, it connects with me. Not only your story connects with people, but you're creating a community that connects with people. Understanding so much of us grew up in this context of Jesus wasn't approachable with our mess, and the church specifically really wasn't, right? Approachable with our mess. And as we look at the gospel more closely, we see that no, it's actually Jesus is inviting us and inviting our mess and wanting to walk with us in all of that. And so I think this is one of our interviews that people are going to want to really connect with you even after this. And so how can they do that? I mean, social media obviously is the way to do that. Where can they find you out there?
Yeah, you can find us on, you can connect with me personally on Facebook or Instagram, just under my name, Ryan Canaday. And then we also have a Facebook page called Free. You can connect with us there. You can always shoot us an email at bethewagon@gmail.com.
Be the Wagon. That's a great email. That's a great one.
And here's why if I could just take 30 seconds to tell the story. The wagon, a wagon is a central image in our community. And why that is, man, a couple of years ago, I was at the rescue mission in LA, which is, I believe it's the largest rescue mission in the States. But anyway, the director was giving us a tour. And we went upstairs, and there's this hallway with their pictures of their history. And in the middle of this hallway, there's this large picture of a wagon. And I said, dude, what's the story behind the wagon? And he said, dude, you don't know the story behind the wagon? And I said, oh, man, sounds incredible. Tell me. And he said, that's how we got started, was the wagon. And I think it was 1857. It was sometime in the late 1800s, but that's when the rescue mission got started. And literally they had this wagon, and it would go to some of the roughest places in LA where all the bars were, all the mischief was happening. And this wagon would go and they would hand out Bibles and food and hope. And then they would say to people, anyone who wants to come back to a place of safety and recovery, you can get on the wagon and we'll take you there. And so what happens when you get a bunch of drunk people on a wagon? Well, some people fall off, and it's worm falling off the wagon.
Wow.
Which was just totally mind-blowing when I connected that. It's like, dude, is that where falling off the wagon comes? They said, yeah. Wow. So anyway, when people would fall off the wagon, this wagon would stop, and people would get off this wagon and help that brother or sister who just fell off, and they'd get them back on the wagon. And so when we started Free, it was our very first week. We put a wagon in the middle of our yard. And I said to people, let's create a community where we're the wagon, where we don't kick our wounded. We always be a place of grace and acceptance and forgiveness. And when people fall off, we stop and help them get back on. That's why the wagon is still a central image in our community, and our email is bethewagon@gmail.com. So you can remember to be the wagon. That's what the church at its best. The church is a wagon, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Congrats on getting that email address in like 2018.
Yeah, we were so happy.
Right?
Know, right?
It's not bethewagon_01.
Yeah. Be the wagon.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for taking this journey back in time with us. The Free spiritual community is growing, and they're asking for help in getting some appropriate space. So if you'd like to support what they're doing, then check out freespiritualcommunity.com. And you can learn more there and also donate to their cause there. If you want to check out more on Compass, well, some good follow-up episodes include episode 108 with John Blake about world-changing relationships. Here's another really inspiring personal story. And also episode 98 with Pastors of TikTok. That'd be good too, as it discusses the innovative ways the church reaches people with messages of grace. Good stuff all around, really. While you're listening, leave a rating and or review. That would be so much appreciated. The Compass Podcast is brought to you by United Methodist Communications. And Michelle Maldonado and I, Ryan Dunn, will be back with a brand spanking new episode in 2 weeks. So we'll chat at you then. In the meantime, peace